beatings, sexual assaults, waterboarding, forced enemas, and other cruel torture. It's hard to imagine these human rights violations being repeated in the same place, Guantanamo Bay prison, established by the United States.
By the U.S. government prison at Guantanamo Bay.
Until 2022, this notorious prison has been existent for exactly 20 years. The prison, located in Cuba, was built and is governed by the United States. Shortly after the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. entered the war against Afghanistan. A non-national territory was needed to hold terror suspects captured in Afghanistan. On January 11, 2002, Guantanamo Prison was established. Over 20 years, 779 people have been held at the prison. As detainee abuse scandals continue to come to light, Guantanamo has become a pronoun for human rights abuses. Yemeni National Khalid Qasem said in an open letter that he has been detained without charges or a trial at Guantanamo Bay since 2002. A group of independent human rights experts appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council issued a statement that the U.S. practice of arbitrary detention without trial at Guantanamo Bay is simply unacceptable for any government. These freehand sketches from a detainee at Guantanamo Bay show details of his mistreatment and torture at the hands of the CIA. He was waterboarded 83 times. Majid Khan, a Pakistani detainee at Guantanamo Bay, said at his hearing that he was beaten, given forced enemas, and sexually assaulted during his detention. He was dosed repeatedly by the interrogator with ice water to keep him awake for days. He described having his head held underwater to the point of near drowning. Khalid Qasem also revealed that in Guantanamo, being kicked and punched is commonplace. The torture we are exposed to is not isolated to the interrogation rooms. It exists in our daily lives. This intentional psychological torture is what makes Guantanamo different. However, the U.S. insists that the above actions do not constitute detainee abuse, but idealized it as enhanced interrogation. The definition of the United States in the Federal Criminal Code includes military installations outside its territory, but does not apply to its military bases overseas. As a U.S. naval base, Guantanamo sovereign belongs to Cuba, which means it does not have to report its activities to the U.S. domestic courts. In this way, Guantanamo becomes a gray area, what can circumvent U.S. domestic laws, preventing suspects from enjoying the same rights, such as habeas corpus, as prisoners held in the U.S. This gives Guantanamo extraterritoriality. This extraterritoriality has resulted in the majority of suspects being held without trial, without charges, and without access to counsel, let alone to the judicial process. The Geneva Convention clearly stipulates that persons taking no active part in the hostilities, including prisoners of war and civilians, shall in all circumstances be treated humanely, without any adverse distinction. However, the U.S., as a high contracting party, has played a word game of double standard in order to avoid the regulations of the convention. The U.S. government argues that because the suspected terrorists do not belong to any military of any country, Al-Qaeda members attack civilians, and the detainees are classified as illegal combatants, so they are not protected by the convention. In a statement released in 2022 by a group of independent human rights experts appointed by the UN Human Rights Council, Guantanamo was named as its stain on the U.S. government's commitment to the rule of law. Hina Shamsi, director of the National Security Project at the American Civil Liberties Union, called Guantanamo a legal, moral, and ethical failure and a symbol of American injustice, torture, and disregard for the rule of law. On April 16, 2021, 24 Democratic senators signed a letter to the president calling the facility a symbol of lawlessness and human rights abuses that continues to harm U.S. national security and demanding that it should be shut down. After the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. authority enacted the notorious USA Patriot Act, which gave the CIA immense power. The act allowed the CIA to torture and fabricate charges against captured suspects at their secret prisons abroad, which could illustrate their contributions. Some Afghans even worked with the CIA to sell the so-called terrorists to the Americans at the price of $3,000 to $25,000 per person, which made up the CIA's achievement of countering the alleged terrorist organization. Reviewing the data of the U.S. Department of Defense, a research center discovered that over 80% of the prisoners were captured, not by Americans on the battlefield, but by other countries' people in exchange for bounty payments. Furthermore, the CIA even withdrew money from Guantanamo by all means. The CIA used to hire a company to develop torture methods, labeling them interrogation techniques. The contract which the CIA signed with the company was for more than $180 million, but the company had only received about $81 million when their contract was terminated in 2009. So, where did the rest of the money flow to? The cost of operating and maintaining the Guantanamo was surprisingly high as well. It was calculated that the annual cost of maintaining Guantanamo was up to $150 million. With only 39 detainees now, the expense works out to $4 million per year for each prisoner. Where did that money go? In November 2008, Barack Obama, who was the then Democratic presidential candidate, had announced his plan to shut down Guantanamo Bay within the first year after he took office. However, only half a year later, he failed his promise. Obama said he would continue to promote the court material system established by President George Bush for interrogating terrorism suspects. Things took a sharp turn for the worse during Donald Trump's presidency. In his run for the White House, Trump promised to load Guantanamo Bay up with more bad dudes. On January the 30th, 2018, soon after he took office, Trump signed an executive order to keep Guantanamo Bay open and even considered sending COVID-infected Americans there. In his presidential election, Joe Biden, like Obama, repeatedly said he wanted to close the prison. Yet until now, instead of being shut down, Guantanamo Bay is still expanding, with new $4 million courtroom to be built this year. The reason behind the failure of closing Guantanamo Bay probably lies in this article. Once you move outside the laws and norms of this country in a significant way, the return to normalcy becomes ever more problematic, and the longer the exception, the harder such a restoration will be. The Guantanamo Bay prison is just the tip of the iceberg of the U.S. global black sites network. Nowadays, 39 detainees are still held at Guantanamo, among whom only a few prisoners were charged or convicted. Honor bound to defend freedom was the slogan written on the board at Guantanamo's detention camp. This couldn't be more ironic.